are you? Can you hear us?
Can you hear us okay? I have big, loud mouths.
Yeah.
How about you? Yeah,
Hi.
there you go.
We're going to be talking about color, forecasting in the home interiors today. So I work for Fashion Snoops. I'm the VP of Interiors, and we're going to be talking about how we're connecting culture to product. That's something that we do at Fashion Snoops a lot. But so how we're going to kind of structure the presentation is I will be talking about culture and what we're seeing on a big picture projection from a cultural perspective, and then Sue will be talking about color and how that applies to product.
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion. I'm excited that we're going to be able to kind of talk through this because it's sort of the behind the scenes of color trend forecasting and where does this stuff all come from?
Yep.
So Jay's big vision and then taking it down to the next level to be talking to designers on how we interpret those colors. So hopefully everyone will be really interested in what we have to say. And then I think we're going to leave a couple minutes at the end of the presentation if you have questions. So feel free to make notes and ask away.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, we're just going to jump right into it.
Yeah.
So this also, you guys will be getting the color mix forecast as you guys leave.
As a takeaway, yeah. There's
as a takeaway.
A table outside with our forecast. So this is just our graphic for 2019's forecast. We're talking about 6 small themes this year, micro themes, if you will, which we'll go into as we go through the presentation. But we wanted to kick off the discussion on a large level, like this big thinking level, which Jay's going to take us through first.
Yeah. So our first story that we're talking about, or Sherwin-Williams is predicting for 2019, is called Shapeshifter. So we have applied 2 macro developments from Fashion Snoops that then land you into Shapeshifter. So the first one that we're talking about is called the new creative. This one's a fun one. People always ask us about millennials. Right? That's a huge one for a lot of product developers, especially within this industry. People are always wanting to know where the millennial is going, where they're coming from, what their mode of thinking is. And the funny thing about this is we are now developing, people are coming out of school today, and what we're calling a new creative, they're able to design it, build it, market it, put it on Instagram, sell it, make money from it. They don't need an advertising agency. They don't need a whole product development team in China. They don't need any of it. They are a one-stop shop. And that is what we're calling this idea of new creative. So how we work at Fashion Snoops is we actually study data. We collect data, and then we forecast trends from this data. So all of these charts that you're looking at are actually our data algorithms. Those change daily. We have a team that actually collects and reads the news, applies data to this news. So this is the data for the new creative. And what we're really looking at for this trend for Shapeshifter is we're actually looking at industry disrupted, which is a huge one. And it's the fact that, the workforce is really changing. CEOs are changing. They're 20-somethings now. When Facebook was created, it was created by a 20-something. That's kind of scary, right? It's completely different. So the industries today, they're being completely disrupted. Traditional business is really changing. So it's really interesting to look at that from a product development standpoint or from a business standpoint. You can't disregard the younger generations, the new creative generations. And then we're also looking at things like new media. How many of you guys read Facebook every single day? Show of hands. How many of you guys read it for news? Show of hands. How many of you read your Instagram or look at Instagram for news and knowledge every day? Twitter is a huge one. I'm sure most of you watch CNN. It's amazing to me how many quotes on CNN are pulled from Twitter. Yeah. That is new media. And it's the fact that people are able to give a more personalized voice than ever to the actual media and the general public are actually falling into them and reading into those new medias more so than ever. And from that, partnerships are growing. So you're starting to see that brands and ads are paying attention to those new media platforms more so than ever. So what we want to actually do here too is show you how we got here and then where we're going for 2020 with each one of these macro trends. We study these big macros 2 years in advance. So we're landing for these color forecasts in 2019, but we also want to kind of show you where we're predicting into going for 2020. So you can kind of see in 2018, we were really in this industry disrupt conversation, which we were just talking about, and we paired it with this really energizing movement. You know, there were a lot of makers happening. This conversation of the craftsman, this maker, tech geeks and artists, they were really using the right tools, and this idea of potential to change the world was happening. And in 2019, we were starting to see this shift into what we were calling the new creative, and it was being paired. We paired it nicely with this trend that we'll talk about here in a few minutes called emotional capacity, that really talks about why people are craving, you know, emotional things within their product. And then for 2020, this one's actually my favorite macro trend that we're projecting to happen, which is called pursuit of happiness. And it's the fact that people are no longer establishing, you know, they're no longer associating success with money, they're associating success with happiness. And that's because people are really looking for a more fluid lifestyle. They're looking for, you're starting to see things like more genders pop up. You're starting to see things like people are living more off the grid. They're living more like freelance cultures coming to the forefront. People are wanting to find happiness within their everyday life. They're wanting more freedom within their choices. And so we're starting to see that really be pushed to the forefront. So thinking about that from a business perspective. So then our second trend that we're really merging in for Shapeshifter is called through space and time. And it's the fact that people are really merging physical and virtual spaces. They're really craving escapism. This is a huge thing that we saw in Milan when we were there earlier this year. And the fact that fantasy was a huge trend there, I'm sure that you saw that. Yeah. And it's the fact that convenience has really come to the forefront. So people are not only wanting escapism on a virtual level, but on a physical level, they're wanting to merge that with convenience. So we can kind of talk about that, what it looks like. So the convenience movement. How many of you guys have an iPhone and use apps all the time, like Uber? It's crazy,
You should
right?
just ask who doesn't use.
Who doesn't use Uber?
Right.
Like, it's kind of crazy how convenient our lifestyles have become. Everybody is at a touch of a button these days, and you want that in all of your products. People want things that are more and more convenient to them. They want things that are really fluid and easy and accessible. And it's really important as you're doing those, you know, business practices and you're thinking about product development to make sure that your product is convenient online. I can't tell you how many brands we work with all the time that it is so hard to search your website. It has to be convenient to shop. We're also seeing things like smart cities pop up. You know, things like Samsung, Amazon, Facebook, they have all these smart villages. I'm not sure if any of you have toured places like Facebook. It's a smart village when you walk through those places, and it's completely convenient to everyone that works there. These things are on the rise as we're starting to see humans kind of want this development within the workplace. We're also seeing developments towards the space race. You know, Elon Musk, his SpaceX, as well as, you know, Richard Branson's, his Galactica. People are taking what used to be NASA into their own hands. And it's these tech companies that are taking it into their own hands. So we're starting to see people really pay attention to that, and I think that's really what is shifting this trend to the forefront.
Right.
Also, the fact of unknown worlds. If you look on Instagram today and you pay attention to, you know, things like NASA, those feeds have hundreds, millions of followers for a reason. People want to see and explore realms that they've never been able to explore before. You know, people want to be able to Google to the ends of the earth, things that they've never been able to Google before without ever having to leave their home. There is a, you know, clear consciousness that humans can really research to the depths of things and explore unknown worlds. So you're seeing things like drones go into like the depths of caves. You're seeing that, I think it was Google, who is now doing replicas of all of the ancient artifacts in Greece, which is really crazy. So you don't actually ever have to go to Greece anymore. You can just go on your computer and you can see all the artifacts that ever happened and all of the ancient landmarks without ever having to go to Athens. That's crazy. It kind of is scary to think that you could probably get a better view from Google than actually if you had to go stand in line in Athens. So, and a lot of that's coming through in virtual reality. The fact that you're going to very soon be able to put on a headset and see all of this stuff.
Right.
And that is they're predicting that to be the future.
Right.
Is to, that's the biggest reason why Facebook bought into buying Oculus, is being able to put on that headset and being able to predict and transport you into escapism.
And it's not 50 years from now.
No, this is like happening within the next 5 years from now. And how that will affect your product lines, making sure that you're ahead of the curve, it's really kind of important. And you can even see all of the news algorithms, or all of the news that is being talked about. We're proving to you the data of things like virtual reality, space race, convenience. We're tracking all of that data so you can actually see, and it's proven, it's validated right there, of how frequently people are actually talking about it. So yeah. So when we're looking at things like for 2020, we're actually pairing this virtual reality meets physical reality space conversation with the human nature conversation and the eco-green reality conversation to land what is in for 2020 called the Pale Blue Dot. That's a Carl Sagan's book that he wrote, and it's the fact that we really have to take care of our planet. That's a huge conversation that I'm sure everybody is aware of. And we've gotten a little bit better about it. Some people don't want to admit it. However, sustainability and our eco-conscious mindset has to be there, or our world is gone. Yeah. And I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons why we're seeing so much of this galactic conversation come to the forefront, and this universal conversation come to the forefront, is because if it's not on our peripheral vision right now, then it's going to disappear. Right. Human population is going to disappear. And I think, the more and more we're not aware of it, or the more and more we don't do something about it, then the more and more the harder we're just going to dissipate out. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So then we land into Shapeshifter.
So I'll drive from here. So our job at Sherwin-Williams is to take these macro themes and put them together and come up with a thoughtful story related to color. So we were heavily inspired by the stories of space and where technology is taking us. Everything that Jay sort of set up in this discussion. These are themes that are really important. They're really important in design, but how does that relate to color, which is always a unique challenge? So we'll lay sort of an abbreviated version of our voyage through trends. This is a mood board. So this was sort of the precursor of the discussion on color. What were the finishes that we were seeing? What's the information that's supporting these macro themes to tell the right color story? So again, lots of space reference as far as inspiration and influence. Dichroic finishes on glass and transparency, sort of that film that shows sort of the rainbow effect on glass, that continues to be a key finish that we're going to see in product and home design. Iridescence, again, that sort of transportive, visionary finish on all sorts of surfaces. Again, here's some more of the influences. Artificial intelligence, again, that is a key influence moving forward, probably forever. But then how does our humanity sort of interact with that? As designers, how do you have the human side and the technology and blend them together for relevancy? What is spiritualism today?
Yeah.
That's really changing. It's not just traditional religion anymore. We're getting inspiration from all sorts of spiritual realms. As far as fashion, so we had an interesting conversation earlier. I don't always reference fashion, but in this forecast, I've referenced it a lot, so we'll walk through that. So this is just a quick slide. Again, Elon Musk, privatization of space. We're seeing lots and lots daily, Twitter references on what's going on with the privatization of space. But even so much as if you check out Galaxy desserts on your Instagram feed, you'll be blown away by what
Yeah.
bakers are making, like Galaxy
crazy.
donuts and these beautiful cakes. So obviously, this influence is resonating not just in technology, but also in home. Artificial intelligence, right? The conversation's going to just continue on how we interact with humanity. I don't know that humans are going to, be a dying race and robots are going to take over the world, but how we interact together is going to be an important conversation. Whether it's, there's a robot being developed in Japan that's going to be a home healthcare worker. So how is that going to change healthcare design? Do we change the model of how hospitals are run because we're going to have these artificial intelligences that are, I don't know, did anybody see the movie Big 06? Wait, what was that, the name of it?
I don't think so.
It was like a robotic healthcare worker, right? I mean, it's just the conversation is just changing. But on the flip side, we don't want it to be terrifying. So there are some really interesting work going on with designers. Team Lab is out of Tokyo, and they're creating AI immersive exhibitions. So you walk into a space, and not only is your floor a koi pond that you're walking on water, but you're getting mist in the face, and there's this whole experience around it. And it's changing the conversation about what AI really can be and the human side of it. Spirituality. This is a hugely millennial trend. Again, continuing the conversation of spirituality. People aren't just running to a traditional church as they were before. They're finding healing and inspiration in color therapy and sound therapy and scent therapy, and they're pushing the boundaries of where traditional spiritualism has gone, making it a unique conversation on wellness as well. And we just couldn't ignore fashion as related to this trend. There are so many designers in the last couple seasons that have talked about obviously space, whether it's Balenciaga with these great boots that have little constellations on them, or Space Age and super tech fabrics. So beyond those influences, then, how do we talk about materials and finishes, specifically for product and interiors? So this idea of mystical radiance, again, this translucency, sort of this space-aged rock, these gemstones that look, at times otherworldly, we're seeing those being developed on surface. Iridescence. There's a picture of a Rolls Royce with an iridescent finish. Clearly, that's a luxury brand adopting this. So we've continued to see this dichroic sort of iridescent movement in the last couple seasons, and it's going to continue. Atmospheric, sort of this whimsical, softening, cloudy, atmospheric film related to plastics and fabric and glass, obviously. It just sort of pushes the boundaries of what tactile surface is, sort of dreamlike. Translucency. I love this rug collection. It's designed for inspiration on glaciers, right? So again, the idea of ice and water and translucency, as well as facets, a key shape, and molten and biomorphic shapes. So sort of this like moon rock surface in all sorts of metals and metallics. And then minerals, gemstones, but they're sort of glamorized by metallic edging. So you take this natural surface, this sort of beautiful alien-type shape, and you sort of gild it and make it luxury by adding gold or brass or some sort of metallic on the edging. And then wood surface. Not typically is a surface that you would consider to be visionary or space age, but we're seeing designers apply like a filmy coating, right? So we can figure out how to get this like translucency and wood tone, which I think is really beautiful. This shagreen look, which I think is always gorgeous, but again, kind of pushing the boundaries of what traditional wood surface is to be a little bit more exploratory of this cosmic inspiration. So these are just kind of wrapping up, right? You want to go over the first two?
So the new creative, it's really talking about the nonconformists that are really, changing the way that we work and travel and eat, and the fact that they're able to kind of be this one-stop shop when it comes to being a brand today. And almost every single kid coming out of school today is their own brand. We're taught to be your own brand. When you start an Instagram, you should be your own brand.
Right.
And it's really having that mentality when you're coming out of any type of design school.
I just was at a school and I had listened to a presentation. There are going to be 20,000 design jobs coming out of schools in the next couple of years, because as all these makers develop, not everybody's a designer.
Yeah.
And so these engineers oftentimes need designers to make their products beautiful. So for younger generations or your kids going through design school, it's an excellent time to be a young designer.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of crazy. And then the second one is through space and time. So it's really talking about how digital technology is pushing the boundaries of humanity, and virtual and physical space are really kind of collaborating more so than ever. Creating escapism, and these cosmic plays are really coming to the forefront.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, we're going to move into the next trend, which is Wanderer.
Ooh.
Exciting.
So this one is actually one of my favorite ones for the entire season. I love these two, especially these two macros a lot. So we really pulled Women Unleashed Emotional Capacity into Wanderer. So the first one is called Women Unleashed, and I really loved this one as we had this huge women's movement come to the forefront. It's really beyond empowerment, and it's really talking about how people are craving feminine things, and we're really craving that in all facets of life today. And I think that has been not only a harder thing for people to swallow, but it's also people don't even realize that they're craving it. And that's something that people are kind of now becoming more and more aware of, as you're starting to see things like curves come to design. You're starting to see things like balance come to design. You're starting to see more feminine shapes. You're starting to see things like millennial pink. You're starting to see a lot more softer, more sensual fabrics come to the forefront. And it's really because there's a lot more vulnerability coming to the forefront, and a lot more pushes with women empowerment that people are able to expose, which is, not only do we have a female president or female running for president, however, that created a movement of people and women coming to the forefront, and it allowed a platform for women to show vulnerability, which is huge. Workplace equality is a big movement that is really being pushed to the forefront. The Me Too movement, as we've constantly seen, is a big one. We're still seeing this across the board for women.
Yeah, not going away anytime soon.
And it's not just, oh, we're two women up here talking about a women's movement and blah, 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 blah. You're also seeing the flip side of men actually really craving this, especially within home. Men actually, and I love telling this, there's a huge demographic for men right now. Men are getting married way later than ever. It used to be in the 50s that your girlfriend, your mother would shop for you. You would never have to make your own decisions as a man in the home. And now, most of my guy friends are getting married later than ever, and they're super involved in the home. So it's opened up this huge demographic for men. And what they're craving more so than ever, especially after our statistical research, is feminine products. More feminine things, more options, things that are soft, comfortable, things that remind them of their mother, things their mother would buy them. You're just like, okay. And you're just like, wow, this is really kind of eye-opening. So just kind of like looking, if you find things on Instagram, you're seeing that people are being really open about motherhood. What is vulnerable about motherhood, the fact that it's painful. I don't ever remember growing up hearing any of the hardships about motherhood, anything that was really traumatic about childbirth or any of that. I thought, all of that was just supposed to be a skip in the park my entire life. That's not true, and I think that there's a whole lot of education that has been brought to the forefront about this isn't easy for me now. Postpartum is a real thing. All of these movements, modern feminism has brought a lot of this to the forefront for women, and it's brought a lot of empowerment for women. within this movement too. So it's really quite interesting to see how that's then played out through design as we're starting to see a lot of this, more sensual, more softer touches kind of come through in a visual representation. So how we're actually seeing this come to the forefront for 2020 is we're seeing what we're pairing it with reality paradox. And we'll talk about that one in a few minutes because that one's a trickier conversation. It's talking about how data affects you. And we're pairing the fact of data with Women Unleashed to get you to cross currents. Cross currents is when you kind of like have the combative of two cycles. So we're seeing the combinations of combative things come to light, right? You're seeing a lot of, liberal versus traditionalism come to the cross current at this moment in society. It doesn't matter what side you're on, but you need to be physically, mentally aware of the fact that we're in a cross current moment. So how you want to handle that as a brand, as a product developer, or as a retailer is really important. How you want to step around the conversations of the fact that, there's a lot of juxtaposition in the way that people view things right now is really important, that you actually are more aware than ever. So in 2020 and going in the future years, we're going to see a lot more people address things like identity. You're going to see things address things like gender. You're going to see that people are going to take cross-cultural norms and really widen the gap as opposed to having just two different types of views. They're going to have multiple layers of views. The second one is called emotional capacity, and this is one of my favorite ones that we've been talking about a lot, and it's really the fact that people are so overexposed to technology that they are craving emotional things in the home. You are literally sitting on your couch and you're flipping through your phone and you forget to feel things. And so you are literally reaching down and feeling your blanket to feel things. You have lost all emotional capacity in your mental state, that you are literally reaching to your home things to make you emotionally feel, and to be more mindful, and so people are looking for ways to reconnect and find that emotional journey and find that emotional capacity. So we're looking at things like, mindfulness. There's a huge wellness movement that is really coming to the forefront, whether you're in a corporate atmosphere, whether you're in a boutique atmosphere, or in the workplace. Wellness is on the forefront, especially within younger generations, but definitely in the baby boomer and older generations. And it's really starting with the idea of mindfulness and being more aware of how much you're on your phone. I mean, it's insane, and I love you, Mom, she's sitting here, but my parents are always on their phone, even when we're eating dinner. I'm like, hey, Mom, what are you doing? Get off your phone. It's kind of interesting, and you don't realize how much you're on your phone all the time until you're like, oh my God, I'm so burnt out. Let me just drop this over here. And it's becoming more and more mindful of how that really affects you. And that's why you're starting to see so many AI things that are really pulling you into these other realms, right, which is really quite interesting. And then we're also starting to see how people are pulling, brands like Sony. When we were in Milan, they are starting to bring in things like human sensation and multisensory into their everyday objects. That was a huge exhibition that we saw when we were in Milan, and the fact that they know that people are wanting to put technology in their objects to make them feel more emotional. So we walked through the exhibition, and you would stand in front of a mirror. It would actually take your picture without knowing, and then put your picture in the frame right next to it. So they created all these multisensory things for you to bring you back to reality. And people are looking for ways to emotionally connect through product constantly, which is really quite interesting. So yeah. All right. So as we look through for 2020, what we're really looking for here is ways to create the wow movement. That's a huge one. As we look into Instagram, you guys are really, I'm sure you guys know Have you guys heard of like the Museum of Ice Cream? Has any of you guys been to those things yet? Basically, there's all of these museums, pop-ups, there's all of these Instagrammable moments that these new creatives are creating that you can go and basically create these wow moments, places where people can bring you into an emotional space that you can then post online, which is really interesting.
Right.
So we're actually predicting that people are creating more and more of these kind of like wow-centric feasibility spaces within the future.
So this leads to Wanderer. I probably should just move my chair closer.
Yeah,
I
hi.
stand. I hate those stools. So Wanderer. So how did we get here? Well, definitely the idea
Yeah.
of the feminine and the idea of the human touch were big drivers for Wanderer. But also, again, fashion. I can't believe I'm saying it again. Was a huge driver, which started. Here's a mood board again. Sort of the emotional feeling that you, our creative, came from. But rural lifestyle. So these young millennials, they don't have a ton of money. They live in cities, and they're looking for lifestyles that are outside of the city. But they're looking to permaculture or rural lifestyle. So getting out into the country and sort of homesteading, like a reinterpreted version of homesteading with young families in cities left largely like unconsidered. The New South is a huge influence as well. So I can't live in New York. I'm a creative. I'm going to go live in Nashville and set up a really nice family home, and I'm going to have chickens, and I'm going to can pickles, and I'm going to have a totally different experience. So that was one of the major influences for Wanderer. The idea of modern cowgirl, which I'll show you in just a minute, and then Georgia O'Keeffe. There was an exhibition in Brooklyn that we'll talk about, as well as the desert modern aesthetic. So I touched on this already, this rural lifestyle. So whether it's glamping, I think I read a stat last year, North Americans spent over $3.4 billion on the outdoor industry. So people are willing to get outside. They want to try camping. They want to get out and see what's out in their environment. They want to have an experience that's outside of their phone, right, or outside of their job or outside of their home. And obviously, North America is a beautiful place. So people are getting out and they're exploring it, particularly in the American Southwest. Here we go with fashion. Last winter, this was all Parisian designers. They were all over the American cowgirl.
Like
It was amazing. And so it was the idea of she, right, this free-spirited cowgirl, right, that is on her horse and tackling anything that comes in front of her with this like panache and bohemian pride, was really this one of the formative influences here for Wanderer. This exhibit was exploring Georgia O'Keeffe, but her androgynous style. So stylistically, she had sort of like a, I mean, you can see it here. It's almost like a pilgrim-esque aesthetic. And so her exploration of those androgynous themes way back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s sort of framed up who she was. And obviously, her connection to the American Southwest was something that we all know. So again, this was an influence I was highly inspired by. I love Georgia O'Keeffe, and her story is incredible. Desert modern, where is the whole farmhouse rustic thing going to go? I think we're kind of done with mason jars and shiplap as far as design goes. And I see it going into this expression of desert modern. I don't know if you've seen, Ralph Lauren is celebrating 50 years.
Yep.
And so you're going to start to see this in all the shelter pubs that come out. There is beautiful American landscape, right? This, whether it's the Hunt Club vibe of the 90s, or the American Southwest, this exploration. So I think that's where the rustic farmhouse look is going to go, which is truly beautiful. Finishes and material. Leather. Leather's on every surface, whether it's tiles, product. We're seeing carpeting being developed, obviously, with leather. Any surface, again, in leather is extremely personal. It's tactile. It feels great. So it's a great finish on product. Essential touch is what we're calling this one. So gritty surfaces, sanded surfaces. Again, to your point earlier, right? You want to reach down and you want to touch something and you feel it. What if your phone didn't have a shiny, silky cover, right? What if it had like a soft touch finish on it that you had like sort of this visceral reaction to?
Might not drop it as much.
Yeah, right. Might not drop it as much. Exactly. Denim. Sustainability is a huge topic against every trend that we see, and so we've seen a lot of denim being recycled and upcycled into core products for home.
Yep.
And again, raw yet you find, sanded, dusty, earthy. These sort of terracotta-esque tactile finishes are key. And the desert hues, super inspired. This is where our color of the year came from this palette, which is Cavern Clay, which is a terracotta. I could talk about that color for an hour. And if you have any questions, I can certainly answer them later. But again, this idea that it's rooted to the earth, it's really elemental. It's intrinsic to who we are. It's an ancient color. It's been around forever, as long as the world's been. So really inspired by Cavern Clay. And for wood surface, again, you're seeing these really warm neutrals applied to wood, but in distressed and unexpected ways. Cerusing, what's one of my favorites down in the corner. I love that finish. So here we are, just the wrap up.
So yeah, for Women Unleashed, just talking about how we're looking beyond empowerment. The definition of woman is changing, not only for women in the workplace and motherhood and beyond, but really how it's affecting product as a whole, really seeing how curves are coming to the forefront, things like pink. Really in this theme specifically, even in that color palette alone, how you're seeing the range of neutrals and the reds, the warm colors really kind of make you feel embraced. And then emotional capacity, how things like self-growth and spirituality. The personal exploration of this is really what's the priority as we focus on mindfulness.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Moving forward. Okay.
So next we're going into Aficionado. We have our two themes of new local and reality paradox. So for new local, it's actually funny because you were just talking about a lot of local things, and that actually ties back to the trend before.
Right.
So this is a great one because we are seeing so many consumers move out of cities like New York and LA and into cities like Nashville, Austin, Charlotte,
Yeah.
smaller places that have a more community feel. They're tired of feeling like they're in these big rat race cities. They want to go to places that have a more, suburban atmosphere where they can, get the local coffee shop and they can kind of like have this local community feel, and they have like their little, boutique-y stores that have like all of the logo sayings and things like that. And I'm sure you guys have been there and see that like if you go to Nashville, there are so many stores that are popping up that have that local driven feel. And it's really playing on the fact that people are wanting to go and like have that local charm.
But they also want their, totally high-end coffee. And
Yeah, exactly. That $7 coffee.
Right, so it's all part of it. And, e-commerce is changing that. You can get any product you want anywhere. So
right.
Why would you need to live in New York and, have a tiny house?
Exactly. Yeah, why would you need the tiny space when you can go and have a similar experience with a lot more property? You have the internet. You can go freelance anywhere. You don't need to live in a place like New York and still have the same job.
Right.
So some of these macro trends actually apply to multiple of our trends. So I'll just touch base on a few of the micros within each one of these that are persistent to the trends that we're talking about. So for this one, we're talking about things like cultural tourism and the fact that I'm going to read a fact, the fact that cultural tourism accounts for 37% of global tourism, and furthermore affirms that it will continue to grow 15% each year. That's crazy. That's insane facts. And we're also talking about things like localization, supporting local businesses. I think for a long time, people were like, oh, local business is dying. These mass market giants are coming in, blah, blah, blah. How many of you guys have read about all of these mass market giants dying and shutting down? It's because, A, the internet's come, but also because people want to shop local. These boutiques are sticking around. Yeah. People want that more local feel. They want to feel like they have the personalization in these local stores. And it's really about creating that personalized voice, and that's what makes you more unique and will stay alive and thriving. And then we're also looking at things like new suburbia. And that's what I was talking about earlier, is the fact that people are moving out into these more niche-y towns that create that local feel as well. Right. And it's having this Renaissance movement and what we're calling urbanite families, where they're able to kind of like have this entrepreneur feel and these new places to work, live, and play in these new communities. So what does this look like for 2020? It's the idea that community-driven places are really changing, and consumers are looking for an all-in feel. They're looking for a community and emotional capacity movement within an all-in community-driven atmosphere. Community is coming back, especially within America, and I think that we were missing that for a little while, and I think that especially within the political environment that we've been in, as well as like hearing what's happening within Europe or like within the Middle East with war and stuff like that, people are really kind of looking towards their community to engage in and feel like they can have more of this like back and forth and feel like more like they're in a home environment. So as you're kind of like, we're also seeing this, within a lot of like architecture and urbanization spaces, you'll notice this community feel as you're starting to see like spaces like WeWorks pop up all over the place. You're also seeing it within urban developments, like they'll have retail spaces on the bottom and then apartment buildings on top. That's one of the most popular architectural developments that are happening in these smaller, more niche towns. And it's creating a sense of community within these little hubs. If you go to Denver today, they're all over the place. These little hubs, like you can just park your car and you never actually have to leave this little like hub because it has, all the little niche stores. A Target's like somewhere there in the corner. You can like live in your apartment above it, and you never actually have to leave.
Right.
And so it's really quite interesting to see how these little communities are kind of forming. So our next one is called reality paradox, and this one's a little tricky because we're talking about data. How many of you guys realize how much data affects you, how much Google is tracking you, how much that everything that you're actually reading on Facebook is actually based off of a data algorithm that they've tracked on you? That's really quite scary at the end of the day. We've made a lot of strides in technology, and a lot of these big brands are actually tracking a lot of the data because of that. And even though we're able to track all of this data, we, at the end of the day, are still innately human. So regardless of how much data they have on us, we're still human and can be reactive however we want to. And so I think it's really quite interesting, all of the stuff that you can read on your feed on Instagram, and it kind of freaks you out knowing that they're marketing to something that you probably just said like 30 minutes earlier. Like how many of you guys have had a conversation about something like the color blue, like you've been talking about a blue purse, and like 30 minutes later you look on Facebook and like it's only marketing blue purses to you. Like how creepy is that?
Super creepy.
Like the fact that there's these data algorithms out there, we kind of have to take ownership for that, but we also kind of have to figure out like how to harness that and use it
for good, not evil.
Use it for good, not for evil, and kind of understand the reality and this paradox that we're living in right now. And also from a brand perspective, realize that humans are still going to be humans, so it doesn't matter how much data you track on humans, there's still going to be a reality component to it. So when we're looking at what that means from a micro perspective, we're looking at things like analog versus digital, the fact that, digital versus non-digital, what that looks like in the marketplace today, how much digital applications you actually need to apply to things, what needs it and what doesn't need it. I always say, does that really need it? Does your couch really need a speaker? I don't think so.
Right.
Does it really need to all connect? I don't know yet. I don't really know yet.
Right.
Do you need to nest everything? I don't know. So just like kind of thinking about that. But then there are some really cool advancements. Like I love it when the record player is super, advanced. That's awesome. You know what I mean? Or when my fridge can like kind of tell me what's already in it and it syncs to my phone when I'm at the grocery store and I don't have to actually go home, look what's in the fridge, then go back to the grocery store. That kind of stuff is cool. That's convenient. So it's like figuring out what is needed. You also have things like the filter bubble. And I think as consumers in general, we just all need to realize like what is being filtered to us through things like Instagram and Facebook are usually in a bubble, so we shouldn't take that all at face value. You can see that's probably one of the biggest chunks here. That is a huge portion of news all day, every day, and the fact that our friends and our social media connections and their points of view are, our filter bubbles. So just kind of taking it all as a grain of salt and not necessarily as point blanket facts. Then things like humans versus machines. The fact that modern technology, you were just talking about this earlier, has incorporated robots into a lot of personal things like Amazon. Mostly Amazon, how they package your things is all by robots. They have a few people that work in their warehouse, but mostly it's all packaged by robots. That's kind of crazy. But it's also kind of cool. And then we also have things like untrackable outcomes. So seeing how much of our reality paradox stems from the fear of the unknown. And so the unknown can kind of make you fearful, but also, just kind of understanding that there is a human view to all of the data that we're seeing. So where does that kind of go into the idea of 2020? And this one's a kind of fun one that we've predicted as we look at the idea of millennials and for when it's paired to things like emotional capacity, and we bring it into the idea of selfishly aware. Selfishly aware really talks about the fact that people are obsessed with themselves these days, and the fact that we have things like Instagram, and how many of you guys look through an Instagram feed and you're like, man, that's a lot of pictures of yourself. Yeah, people are really obsessed with taking pictures of themselves. They're posting pictures of their family, or posting this perception of themselves. So as we look at that through design, it's really kind of looking at this tailored look of themselves, this tailored effect of themselves, and what that actually looks like from a product standpoint is really quite interesting as we push forward for 2020. Yep.
So Aficionado comes from reality paradox, but it comes to it in a different way. It's the exploration of, all right, I'm human, I know this is coming, I know this is where life is taking me, but it's really a look back to look forward. So the idea of nostalgia, which I did not coin that phrase, but I love it.
Yeah, me too.
The 60s, mid-century, the 1970s, you're seeing that inspiration in design heavily in product, and it's a key concept because even younger designers are looking back to what was going on in the mid part of last century and getting great inspiration from it. For designers that have, my age, right, we look back on that and there's a nostalgia there. There's like a feeling of, oh yeah, that was life before phones. Do you do that often? Like watching a movie from the 90s, like, what would that movie do with a phone? If that character had a phone.
Like, what would E.T. do? He'd phone home.
Right. But that's an interesting lens to look at, and so where does that tie into design? So that's Aficionado. We were really inspired by the idea of the book. Amazon put every bookstore out of business, and now they're building brick and mortar bookstores because humans are craving a connection with something, a quiet space. They want to read. So for design, let's start designing libraries again, or little reading nooks, or areas where humans can go have a quiet moment and have an interaction with a book. Again, other influences, Tweety menswear. Just from design shows, there was lots of menswear-inspired materials, wools, fabrics, textures. They have a distinctly British character. So we have a lot of inspiration. We had a lot of fun talking about that. And then more on the idea of nostalgia equals nostalgia. So the bookshops, again, my daughter was like, I just read a book and it was an amazing experience. I was like, shouldn't you be doing that all the time? She's 13. No, she doesn't have that sort of relationship with books that I did, pre-phone. So again, it's this exploration of what the idea of a book is.
Yeah.
And that tactile connection to language and stories is really powerful. Fashion, again, little node to fashion, and then this menswear inspired. But the colors are crazy. They're pushing the boundaries of where color is going to take it. So it's not just traditional gray, navy, and blue pinstripe. It's these really warm colors, these rich neutrals all sort of paired together for this little bit of a mishmash in style. British culture, for those that watched last summer's festivities in the UK, it was really inspiring. So Meghan Markle marries a prince, and the whole world is talking about how the British monarchy is going to change after hundreds of years of established traditions. So it was just like we had a love affair, right? We fell in love with that idea just a little bit more. If you're a soccer fan, which I have soccer fans in my house, the British team was great, the English, but Gareth Southgate wore a waistcoat, sweater, like a waistcoat. What do we call that? A vest. And sales on vests in the UK went up 30%, just as a reference. So we were just sort of falling in love with all things British. And I just read I think it was a House Beautiful article that was like, the British are coming. British design is coming to the forefront. So it'll be fun to see what unfolds there. And again, the idea of nostalgia equals nostalgia. This is the Drifter Hotel in New Orleans. It's a brand new, renovated hotel, extremely mid-century. So again, we're getting lots of inspiration from the look back to look forward. Finishes and materials, plaids, checks, you name it. The image up on the upper right, you can't really see it well on this graphic. That was from 1975, Better Homes and Gardens. Wow. It's awesome.
That's also scary.
So obviously the references on the rest of the slide are much more contemporary. But please, these are finishes that you're going to see, and they're going to be nubby and textural.
That wallpaper.
Isn't it awesome? I know. Retro patterns. Lots of, again, looking back to look forward on product design. These are reminiscent surfaces. We've seen these before, so they'll be reinterpreted with new colors and new products, probably on newer technology, but again, that nostalgic look back. Soft finish, we've talked about that. Soft surfaces, you want to touch and have a relationship with what you're sitting on. So tactile textiles are really important, like velvets. Again, it's that relationship. It's that sort of softening expression. Here we're calling it minimal luxe. Typography. We're seeing, again, this idea, the reference of literature and books, but we're seeing it on all sorts of surfaces, whether it's laminated in chairs for a sustainable surface or just in design and product development, lighting. And then here we're calling it tie motifs. Little tiny patterns and textures that were reminiscent of menswear and ties, reinterpreted for products in home. And here's wood surface. Again, these richer jewel tone expressions of color applied to wood, really beautiful, really rich. We're not playing it safe here. There's we're willing to look back at what was done before. 60s kitchens, right? They were a riot of color. They were not Carrara marble and white and subway tiles. They were an explosion of color. So we're excited to see that again. And again, it just isn't a wrap up. You can see the finishes on the bottom, but I'll hand this over to you to.
Yeah, so just talking about from the wrap up of how the new local, the products and places with heart and the local charm that really affects the story. And then the reality paradox is how society has made these incredible strides in technology, but at the end of the day, humans are still really seeking the emotional connections and really looking back to the nostalgia of things. So our next story falls into what we call enthusiast. And
move a little faster.
Move a little bit faster. Sorry,
everybody.
So for new creative, we've talked about that one a little bit, and then we're also going to pair it with identity. So, we talked about what new creative meant going forward, but the ones that we paired with this one is hyperculture, which really is kind of moving this idea of information in new environments and how they're creating the perfect setting for newness and juxtaposition of culture, which is really quite interesting. And then also the freelance culture, that's a huge conversation today as people are really kind of moving out of traditional workplaces and then, moving into a more freelance atmosphere. And so we also spoke about this earlier, so I won't recap what that means, but it's still very valid to the storyline. And then the other macro that we're talking about is identity. So we'll be a little bit more strategic in this, but we're living in the age of a liquid identity. There are more genders than ever. There's 16 actually now, which is really quite interesting. There used to be 2 when I was growing up, which is insane. People are wanting to express themselves and their identity more so than ever. Thanks to technology, thanks to the internet, thanks to Instagram, thanks to Google, people are able to explore faster than ever and identify themselves in different ways. So when we're looking at things like micro trends for this, We're looking at, personalization. That's a huge role when it comes to online, but then also the home. That's the reason why you're seeing so much maximalism. People are wanting to curate their lives more so than ever. They're wanting to create their own personal touch. We're also seeing things like, gender blur. Like we were saying, there's 16 different genders now. People don't know how to identify themselves right out of the gate. They're wanting to explore these realms more so than ever. That's why so many products are becoming more and more gender neutral, and having more acceptance to that is really important. And then also looking at things like modern relationships. We're seeing that people are wanting to be more fluid in their lifestyles, and creating, more acceptance within modern relationships. You can see how big of these data tracking within our chart systems are within the news today, as people are kind of like moving and shifting within these realms. So when we look at this is a conversation that we were talking about previously with All In for something like identity within the community-driven aspects. That's why we're seeing so many people moving into these places, because they're looking to find their community within their identity. They're looking to find, their people, their spaces, people that they can identify with. The internet has really allowed for them to have a more open voice, more vulnerability, more so than ever. So they're really looking for, their niche.
Right. So this is maximalism, everybody. This is creative expression. So don't cover your eyes, because it's going to take you on a little bit of a ride here. But I'm most excited about the exploration of color. Maximalism brings pattern on texture on color, and more is more, and that is, to me, really exciting, because it's been a while. We've been in a really neutral existence for a long time. So I'm excited for the exploration. I am not saying that this is going to be everybody's cup of tea, but I think the references are beautiful, and they're just fun. They're just fun. So we'll cruise through this.
The color.
Again, maximalism that started last year in Milan for home interiors, and will continue. Pattern collision, artistic expression, and the idea of more is more. Love this board, right? So this is from Salone. This is from Maison in Paris this year, and Gucci, right? So this maximalist expression. Animals, puppies, kitties, flamingos, polar bears, pattern on texture on color. There are no rules here. And that sort of liberation, I think, is an exciting, it's just really exciting. Pattern collision, there's no rules. So layering on the right colors on the right pattern on the right product, with the right finish and the right story, all is just the exploration of this maximalist movement. Artistic expression, art is never more important in our lives than now, whether you're a collector or you go to your local retailer to find art. People are willing to bring that into their home because, again, they don't want to live a vanilla existence. They want to bring this creative expression into their home, and art often is the bridge that they need to do that. And there were two influences that I thought were great. Tony Duquette and Robert Venturi. Robert Venturi was a quintessential architect of the 20th century, and he really came to fame in the 80s, in which he worked with Knoll, and he coined this phrase, less is more, but less is also a bore. So maximalists, these are two designers in the last 50 years that have really explored maximalism. And Tony Duquette, if you Google it, you just look at anything he's created, and it's amazing, and it's an expression of maximalism. Finishes and materials, we'll zip through these. Tassels, and more tassels.
Everywhere.
Again, this is from this year, Maison. Animal prints, whether on plates or home decor, fabrics, textiles. I just read a report that the polar bear is the it shape for 2019. So I don't know if that's going to happen, but just letting you know. Hypertropicals, psychotropical, large oversailed tropicals. This isn't new. We've seen this for a couple seasons, but again, I think it's at its zenith here with maximalism. Folk motifs on everything. Obviously, Smeg did a beautiful refrigerator. We see it here in KitchenAid with this mixer. Again, pattern on texture on color with all sorts of folk references. And here we're showing brocade. We haven't seen brocade in a while, but it's reinterpreted and given like a punk rock edge with these crazy colors. So it looks really modern. wood finish, kind of all over the place, this exploration of cracked surface and variegated and veining and different color treatments. So again, it's a exploration of color, richness, depth, and that's enthusiast.
Yeah, so, exploring the idea of what the new creative can be with these nonconformists, these new millennials that are popping up, able to do everything, but then also merging it with the idea of people that, are really exploring their identity and their personalization choices, and the people that are really wanting to be able to be more fluid and have options is really important.
Two more.
Two more, guys.
Bear with us. We'll zip through them.
So our last but not least story. Almost last story.
Yes.
It's called Naturalist. So we're merging the idea of human nature with the story, our macro story called New Local, which we've just talked about. Human nature is the fact that we're becoming more environmentally conscious. There's a lot of breakthroughs with this as people react to the ecosystems, and that will ultimately determine how sustainable we are on Earth. So when we're looking at this, we're really looking at things like biotech and biomimicry. What does that look like? How is that being injected into the products that we're using every day as people become more and more aware of it? We're also looking into climate change. That is one of the biggest conversations that everyone is having, especially, on the news.
If you have no power.
Yeah,
right?
If you have no power, like
Right now.
we do right now. And then also looking at things like, organics and sustainability. More and more products are shifting into into the forefront, and that's really important as we become more and more sustainable. People are wanting and craving that transparency behind their products. They're wanting that information. So as we go into 2020, we forecasted this trend called Dr. Me. It's the fact that everybody is able to Google all of their wellness issues if you want. And the idea that you can literally be your own doctor, you can WebMD whatever you want.
For good or bad, right?
Yeah, you can literally analyze yourself, and you are able to talk to most of your doctors through the computer, and you can really search for your own wellness guides. So you can, project and take care of yourself in different ways than the traditional medicine system that has been established within America or within the world. And so looking at the ways that healthcare is changing within the future is important. And then we're also talking about New Local again, which is what that local charm is all about. So looking at how, people are really craving better products, fewer, better things. With a lot of my clients today, I harp on this more so than ever. We are getting out of this moment of having excess things, especially as Americans. You do not want an excess of things, especially younger generations. They do not want excess stuff. I have a 15-year-old sister. She does not want excess of stuff anymore. She would rather have an expensive t-shirt than a cheap t-shirt any day. And it's because she wants better products and fewer better things. And that's really important mindset to have as you move forward. And it's also because we're seeing a simplification of mindset. We're seeing a simplification of this movement that people are wanting more essentialism within their things as well. They're wanting products that have more purpose-driven items in them. They're wanting a simplification in process. They're wanting purpose in all of their products. So as we kind of drive into where this all lands into 2020, it lands into the all-in theme that we earlier discussed.
All right, so we'll jump into Naturalist. So we were inspired by New Nature for sure, but what is the idea of what the nature palette? We always have like a nature palette, right? Inspired by things that are organic or food or whatever that is. But in this instance, we looked to the woodlands. I had started to see mushroom references at all the design shows. I'm like, what's with the mushrooms? And it just started the thinking,
for sure.
looking to the woodland, to the fantastical. So here's the mood board. It's the woodland reinterpreted through a French apothecary. So Parisian references are really strong in culture. You'll start to see it in movies and themes, and even on commercials that you're seeing, you'll see this French reference. So we really played on the beauty of what that expression is, sort of this vintage botanical vibe. This is also one of my favorites.
Yeah, me too.
Again, we'll talk about Paris, we'll talk about fabulous florals, we'll talk about the woodland setting and terrariums. So Paris, again, this was a recent issue of Kinfolk, if you're not familiar with that magazine. It was all about, what's great in Paris. And Paris is always great. But we're kind of looking at this look back on Parisian culture and sort of what their the street vibe is when you walk through the city of Paris, the city of lights. Lots of inspiration there. Slow flowers. This is a new term for me, which I think is really unique. So as younger designers are coming up, they're concerned with the carbon footprint of fresh flowers. Growing something, cutting it, killing it, it's done, it's got a short life cycle. So we're starting to see a resurgence of really well done and really well designed silked and dried flowers, particularly with designers. There's a need for it and a niche for it, and you can talk to your clients about that. Like, this is a sustainable option for botanicals within the home. Again, this woodland setting, we had talked about it a little earlier, looking to the woods, looking to the forest floor for inspiration, whether it's insects and pattern and texture and color, or terrariums, where we live inside most of our days. We work really hard, so bringing the outside in through a terrarium was a key influence here. Finishes and materials. I love these lights.
Yeah, me too.
They're beautiful. The scale is huge. But again, this mushroom reference, I'll say this now, and I'm gonna sneak into your brains because you're gonna see it everywhere. Sinuous pleats and all sorts of products, whether it's candles or vases or carpets and texture. Overblown florals, so really large scale and really over-the-top colorways, dark, sort of mysterious pattern and color. I love this. This is not your grandma's, vintage wall covering. This is a whole new expression of it, but the detailing on is super traditional. Branch formations, again, the woodland. And here we are with wood surface. So I love the colors for this palette. It's warmer neutrals with a bold pop of pink and sort of this like lichen greens. Just really beautiful. Okay, one more. You guys got one more in you?
So yeah.
All right, we'll just jump.
Yep. So we have Recontour, which merges the human nature and identity conversations. But how that happens is we're looking at human nature from the ecotourism conversation and the fact that people are really looking at the idea of traveling sustainably. It's on the rise in all age groups, and according to data, especially from Booking.com, they found that travelers were 3 times more likely to stay in green accommodations in 2015. I thought that was crazy, right? I would have never thought of that. So ecotourism, people are really striving for more ecological tourist ways to travel. And then also following things like off the grid, escapist destinations, places where you can turn off your phone or you don't get service, that promote unplugging and unwinding and really focusing on, your surroundings and nature is really a growing travel category. So that also then plays into the Dr. Me that we spoke about earlier. And then when we're following the identity conversation, we're looking at things like personal genomics, the large amounts of information concerning all aspects of the individual's psychology. And that's through home test kits. How many of you guys have done one of the home test kits? You guys done 23andMe? People are really wanting to figure out who they are today. And it's, that conversation of where are your roots from? The roots-race conversation is a huge conversation. We're seeing that really expand as people are really wanting to understand what their background is, who they are, where they come from, what is their genealogy. And that is really what's kind of landing in the forefront of trend and being pushed to the forefront. So we're also seeing that then land into the all-in macro as well for 2020.
All right, Recontour. So our interpretation of this, and this is an emerging trend, but one I'm really fascinated with,
me too.
is the influence of Africa. So because of technology, Africa is coming to the forefront in education and science, and there's a whole new generation of designers that are coming out of Africa with new ideas. So we really wanted to explore this. We were talking earlier, we really love the color palette here. It's very warm, it's very rich, it's very unexpected. It's not spicy. We're not talking about bright, bold colors. We're like really rooted in the essence of what I consider the terrain of Africa. Here's a mood board. Heritage craft is one of the things that we're going to talk about as a key influence here, as well as the Made in Africa aesthetic, Ubuntu, responsible tourism, and Afrofuturism. So Made in Africa, they're, again, these makers, we're talking about these new creatives, and because you can make, market, deliver products anywhere in the globe to anybody that you want, this new generation of designers out of Africa are taking their old traditions, candle making or basket making or essential oils, and they're packaging them up and they're selling them out into the world's marketplace, and it's really exciting to see the dynamic expression of design that's really unique. Ubuntu, I love this concept. I'm just going to read it. It's an ethical concept of Southern African origin, meeting humanity towards others. It signifies the belief in a universal bond of sharing that connects all of humanity. And beyond hygge, right, or the concept that we were talking about last year with Scandinavian sort of inward coziness and comfort, this is about humanity and the connection we all have together. I just find it absolutely just a beautiful theme. And one of the influences that we were reading about was the Empathy Museum. It's a pop-up, and I think it's currently in Atlanta. Here's our team here. It's in Atlanta. And basically, you can go in, you can take off your shoes, and you walk through the footsteps of people having experiences before you. Whether you're talking to somebody that was in a prison camp or extradited out of a country and now they're a new nomad. It's, again, this idea that we're all connected through the voice that is our humanity, and it's just I find it a beautiful concept. Responsible tourism, you teed that up, so I don't want to spend a ton on that, but we want to go to the places on the earth that we never dreamed that we could ever get to, but we need to do it responsibly. We need to take care of the environment. We need to not obliterate the animals that live there and the indigenous people. So ecotourism and responsible tourism will continue to be a thriving segment. Afrofuturism, I don't know if anybody saw Black Panther. It was a Marvel movie that came out last year, and even if you're not into that sort of thing, I highly recommend it as designers that you check it out. It is a stunningly beautiful movie. And it tees up the idea of Afrofuturism, which is basically taking ancient African roots and blending them with technology. And it's kind of, I wasn't aware of this movement before I became obsessed with Black Panther and started the research on it. So you'll start to see young designers out of Africa really focused on this movement, which is Afrofuturism. And it's just exciting to see, and it's like, you got to see the Black Panther. Finishes and materials. Cracked and chipped. Nothing is taken for granted in Africa, so every chipped vessel and tile is sort of reconstituted and put back together in a sustainable way. Dusty, again, this beautiful landscape, very rooted, very warm, lots of reference with this like dusty soil. So again, really anchored color palette, love it. Clay baked. Folk motifs, reminiscent of, there's 4 distinct cultures in Africa, north, south, east, and west. So it's sort of the fusion of all of those elements. Basketry and woven materials. And concrete. I didn't know this before researching this, but polished concrete has been used in Africa for over 6,000 years. So it's an ancient practice, obviously, that we're still using today. So it's a key surface, as well as adornments. And you'll start to see these, peeking their head out of shows, the inspiration in Africa. So masks and tribal expressions in baskets, just super beautiful. And wood surface, again, very natural, very organic, like very elemental, I'll say. You really look at the surface. The color is intrinsic, but it's also about the surface and the texture. All right, and that wraps up Recontour.
Yeah. So just following the ideas of being off the grid and following human nature of the environmentally conscious breakthroughs, but then also wanting to explore your identity in those realms through individuality.
Yep.
So, yeah.
All right, that wraps it up. Thank you so much for putting up with us.